The diner sat on the lonely edge of Highway 49, a fading sign reading "Ginny, stop creaking" in the dry desert wind. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, motor oil, and hot dust, the kind of scent that told stories of long drives and tired souls. Ginny, the owner, stood behind the counter wiping down mugs, her belly round beneath her apron, 7 months along, and still working every shift with the same gentle smile she'd had since she opened the place. The regulars, truckers, bikers, and a couple of old-timers, admired her grit, often telling her she was the heart of that forgotten road. It was late afternoon when the peace shattered. A man in a wrinkled gray suit shoved open the door, his tie loosened, his face slick with sweat and frustration. He looked out of place in that diner, like a businessman who had lost his deal and his mind somewhere along the highway. He slammed his hand on the counter and barked, "Coffee, now." Ginny, ever calm, smiled softly and said the kitchen was about to close, but she could pour him a cup to go. The man sneered, muttering something under his breath about lazy people. A few heads turned. One of the truckers narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. Ginny set the coffee on the counter anyway, her voice steady, but when she told him the total, he exploded. He accused her of overcharging him, of being rude, of disrespecting him. His words grew louder, filthier, angrier. Ginny tried to calm him down, saying she didn't want any trouble, but the man wasn't listening. His rage was too far gone, fueled by whatever ghosts chased him down that highway. When she stepped back and told him to leave, his hand moved faster than anyone could react. The slap rang through the diner like a gunshot. The sound of skin against skin silenced the room. Ginny stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide, not from the pain, but from the shock that someone could do such a thing. A fork clattered onto a plate. One of the old men rose from his booth, fists clenched, but Ginny raised a trembling hand, stopping him. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." The man who had struck her froze, his anger fading into something pale and ugly. Fear, maybe, or shame. He looked around at the faces glaring at him, realizing too late that in that small-town diner, he had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He threw a crumpled bill on the counter and muttered an apology that no one heard, then stumbled out into the fading light. The bell above the door jingled one last time, and then there was only silence. Ginny stood still for a long while, her breath shaky, the red mark on her cheek bright against her pale skin. Somewhere outside, the man's car engine roared to life and disappeared down the road. The waitress called the sheriff. The truckers muttered darkly among themselves. And behind the counter, Ginny just stared out the window, the sun sinking low over the desert, unaware that an hour later, the sound of engines would return, louder, heavier, and far more dangerous. An hour had passed since the sheriff's cruiser pulled away from Ginny's stop, its red and blue lights fading into the twilight. Inside the diner, silence lingered like a fog. The few customers who remained spoke in hushed tones, unsure whether to stay or go, their eyes drifting again and again to Ginny, who sat in the corner booth with a cold compress pressed against her swollen cheek. Her face was pale, but her eyes, though tired, were steady. The sheriff had promised to look into it, but Ginny knew how that usually went in a town like Ridgeview. The man would be long gone, swallowed by the desert before the law did anything. She tried to convince herself that she was fine, that it was just a bad moment in a long day, but deep down, she felt something had shifted, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Outside, the last streaks of sunlight bled into the sand, and then came a sound that made every cup on the counter tremble, the low, thunderous growl of motorcycles. It started faint, like distant thunder, but grew steadily louder until it filled the air, shaking the diner's windows and rattling the silverware. Ginny's heart skipped. She knew that sound. Within minutes, a dozen bikes rolled into the gravel lot, their headlights slicing through the dusk. The Hells Angels. They'd been coming to Ginny's for years, men in leather and steel, rough around the edges but loyal to the bone. They rode through twice a month on their way west, and they always stopped for coffee, pie, and a friendly word from the woman who treated them like family when most of the world wouldn't. Tonight, though, their arrival felt different. The leader, Mac, Iron Hand Carter, swung his leg off his Harley and looked toward the diner, his silver beard catching the fading light. He pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly, and the entire diner seemed to exhale at once. Heard something happened, Max said, his deep voice calm but edged with steel. Jenny tried to smile, brushing it off. Just a bad customer, Mac. It's fine. But her voice wavered, betraying her. Mac's sharp eyes caught the bruise on her cheek, and the calm in the room vanished. Who did that? He asked quietly. No one answered, but the waitress, unable to hold it in, whispered the story. The room grew heavy. Mac didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, silent, his jaw tightening. Then, without a word, he turned to his men. Where? He asked. The trucker by the window gave the faintest nod toward the highway. Mac's eyes followed, cold and certain. Let's ride, he said. Jenny stood quickly, shaking her head, her voice trembling. Mac, don't, please. I just want it to be over. He looked at her then, really looked, and his expression softened. Your family, Jen, he said quietly. No one lays a hand on family. The engines roared back to life outside, echoing across the desert like a promise. And as Jenny watched the red taillights disappear down the road, she realized something she hadn't felt since the slap: safety, wrapped in the thunder of retribution. The night had fallen hard over the desert, the sky an endless stretch of black velvet scattered with cold stars. The wind carried the smell of dust and gasoline as Mac and his crew thundered down the highway, a dozen headlights cutting through the dark like a pack of wolves on the hunt. They didn't need words. The engine spoke for them. Each man knew what they were riding for, what kind of line had been crossed. Mac rode at the front, his mind steady and focused. He wasn't a man who believed in chaos or revenge for its own sake, but he believed in respect, and no one disrespected Jenny. The tip from the trucker had led them to a rundown roadside motel 3 miles down, the kind of place that reeked of desperation and old cigarettes. The Angels rolled into the gravel lot, their tires crunching like bones beneath the weight of justice. The man in the gray suit, his name was Thomas Reed, though no one there cared, was inside his room, pacing, his nerves frayed. He'd been watching the news on the old TV, hoping to see nothing, praying the incident would fade away. Then he heard the engines. At first faint, then louder, closer, like thunder crawling straight toward him. He peered through the cracked curtain and his heart stopped. Bikers, a dozen of them, walking toward his door. Panic set in. He fumbled for his keys, tried to grab his bag, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The knock came, slow, deliberate, like the sound of a verdict. Thomas Reed, a deep voice called. Open the door. He froze. The door shook once, then twice, and finally swung open under Mac's hand. The room filled with leather, shadow, and the smell of gasoline and dust. Mac stood still, his presence heavy and calm, eyes locked on the man who had slapped a pregnant woman. You know why we're here, Mac said quietly. Thomas stammered something about a mistake, about anger, about how he didn't mean it. His words spilled out in trembling waves, but none of the men spoke. Mac stepped closer, his voice low and steady, more terrifying than a shout. You hit a woman who's done nothing but help people like us for years. You hit family. Thomas backed away until his legs hit the bed. Please, he whispered. I didn't. Mac cut him off with a raised hand. You're going to leave this town. Right now. You'll drive east, and you won't look back. And if we ever hear that you laid a hand on another woman, we won't come to talk next time. His words hung in the air like the weight of judgment itself. The Angels turned and left as quietly as they had come, the sound of their boots fading into the night. Minutes later, Thomas's car tore out of the parking lot, dust trailing behind it like smoke from a burned-out soul. Back at Ginny's diner, Mac returned just before dawn. He didn't say what happened, and Ginny didn't ask. He just poured himself a coffee, nodded to her, and said, "No one touches family." The engines faded into the distance again, and the desert was peaceful once more.